Hello, my name is Ross, and I'm going to show you how you can use properties and HTML attributes to improve the development experience of custom elements. So we have our counter element from last time. We're going to, instead of doing all of the work in connected callback, we're going to create some properties so we can reference some of these elements in different methods outside of the connected callback method. So how might we do this? Counter button is a class, so we can move these up and create properties. So we can do that for button, we can do that for count. And then we need to use the this keyword to reference these. So we can add in the this dot button. And now we'll be able to access these properties outside of the connected callback function. So make sure that's still working. All right. Let's update the names of these. Just a good rule of thumb, every custom element usually has a trigger, and then it also has a content element. And maybe not all of them have both of these, but for the most part, there's something that the user interacts with. I'm going to call a trigger, and then something that updates or gets acted upon, which I'm going to call content. So we've got that set up. Now, how might we simplify this even further? We can store our count variable within a HTML attribute. So something that's nice is, much like creating a prop, if you're used to using JavaScript frameworks, we can use an HTML attribute to pass some initial value in for the count that we can use instead. So we're going to store this as the HTML attribute count. So how might we do this? So we've got that on there. We want the initial count to be 5. We're going to create getter and setter methods for count. So for a getter method, it needs to return a value, and we're going to return this.get attribute count. And get attribute can return null, so if it does return null, we're going to return 0 instead, meaning that no attribute is set, and we want count to return a number. So similar to this where we're getting the current down here, we're going to move that work up to this getter method. And then we need a set count function, which will take in a number as well. And it's going to set the attribute count, and we want to work with a string here, so we'll say const string count equals string, and we're going to set the count to the string count, and then we're also going to update the content. So now that we have access to content as a property, we can say this.content text content equals string count. All right. So what does this enable us to do? Instead of having this event listener have a lot of logic inside of it, we can remove all of this code and simply say, when somebody clicks on the trigger, we want to update this.count equals this.count plus 1. And so what's this doing? This.count equals is running our setter method, and whatever this value is being passed into this function. And then when you're running this.count, on the right side of the expression, we're running the getter method, and we're finding whatever the current count is and adding one to it. So you can see this count property is always going to return a number, and it looks just like a variable since we're using getter and setter methods. So this is a nice way to improve the experience. The one last thing we need to do is we need to see if there is already a count set by our users in the HTML. So instead of setting our text content to 0, we're going to set the text content to this.count instead, and that needs to be a string. All right, so now we can see we saved. You open up and you can see our initial count is 5, and when you click, it increases by 1. So if we go in and we can change this to a different number, so we want it to be 9, that changes the initial count. So now as a user of this web component, we have a nice way to set an initial value for it. Also, as a user of this web component, we can select it and we have access to our properties. And if you're using TypeScript, you can pass in your class, and you can see that we have access to these properties there. Counter.count, and we can just log that and see if it's working. But if somebody wants to do something else with the count, they're able to do that, and you can see it's logging 9. Say we want to set the count, we can also do that. So counter.count equals 20, and you can see that's set to 20 now. So it's a nice way to provide different ways for users to interact with your custom element and also make the experience of working with custom elements a little nicer. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you like this video. Have a great day.